Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Arcade Wrath of the Mutants, released in 2024 for Nintendo Switch, also available for PlayStation 4 courtesy of Game Mill, Cradle Games, and Raw Thrills, and yes, this is a 2024 home conversion of a 2017 Raw Thrills developed arcade game based on the 2012 Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles CG animated series, but enhanced with a few more stages of play exclusive to this home conversion for a total of 6 whole stages of arcade action, one of which is locked away until you clear the remaining 5. But yeah, this is the hit Turtles game that everyone's been raving about, right? The one based on a beloved Turtles cartoon from the past with oodles of nostalgic overload and old-timey Turtles arcade goodness? It has to be this one because there are no others. Right? So I played the arcade machine a while back at a local arcade joint a short while ago, and it was alright. Fun little beat-em-up game for short bursts of play, nothing too fancy. And while it's nice to see an arcade title get a home conversion, mostly for the sake of preservation and wider availability, I do question why this game in particular took 7 years to make the jump to the home consoles. Maybe it's a licensing issue or something, but even Cruisin' Blast, another Raw Thrills arcade release from 2017, didn't get a home port until 4 years later. Now to be fair, Cruisin' Blast on Switch is a tremendous package that greatly expands on the arcade original with new cars, tracks, and other bits and bobs to give it that extra bit of replay value, so that made it worth the wait. In the case of Wrath of the Mutants, however, I'm not so sure that I could say the same. With the prior release of Shredder's Revenge or the Cowabunga Collection, along with a couple new titles on the horizon, Switch already has ample amounts of turtle power to satisfy that raw thrill, no pun intended. Those games I've mentioned are fine pizza dishes with plenty of quality ingredients, while Wrath of the Mutants is a plain tomato sauce pizza. It's edible, it's tasty enough, but it leaves you wanting more. But we're jumping ahead, let's dive in and give this game a deeper look. So Wrath of the Mutants is a side-scrolling beat-em-up. You pick one of 5 available stages to play, then you pick your turtle or turtles, as up to 4 players can share in the fun, and you move on to the right. You beat up a bunch of foot soldiers, Mousers, crank soldiers, and other bad guys. Each stage is a lengthy stretch that has you fighting a bit boss at the halfway point, and also an end boss at the end point. You start with 3 lives and 2 continues each time you start a stage, which should be enough to get you through if you don't suck hard enough. Once the initial 5 stages are cleared, the final Shredder stage is unlocked, where your toughest challenge awaits and that sort of thing. Controls are straightforward. Move your turtle with the analog stick, D-pad does nothing, attack with the attack button, jump with the jump button, and there's also a turtle power button that activates your special turtle power screen nuking attack whenever your turtle power meter is filled, which is done by beating up bad guys. And the controls are fairly responsive, pulling off moves is about as fluid as any prior Turtle arcade beat 'em up, and the overall premise is relatively straightforward. The best way for me to describe Wrath of the Mutants is that it is essentially the abridged book of ninja fighting. It's got the basic mechanics down, the action is fairly fast and frantic, the 4-player local co-op makes the whole thing more enjoyable as a party game of sorts, but it's a very shallow experience otherwise, which is understandable because this is an arcade port after all. The game does take some inspiration from prior Turtles arcade games, Turtles in Time especially. I think that's reflected in some of the stages that the game throws at you and also some of the attacks, and oftentimes that's not a bad thing. But you do run the risk of having your game reminding you too much of some other game you could be playing right now instead of this shallow imitation. The fact that Wrath of the Mutants is basically 6 different score attack stages and not one cohesive narrative takes some bite off this thing, but on the other hand, being able to tackle these stages in any order does mix things up a bit, even if there isn't much to mix up in the first place. For what it's worth, Wrath of the Mutant looks decent enough, perfectly aping the visual style and presentation of the 2012 animated series that serves as the game's main inspiration. Naturally, one would expect some minor graphical downgrades in the jump from arcade to console, but for the most part, the game looks fairly slick, and the frame rate is at least consistent. Some folks might lament the game being a bit too much on the dark side of things, but I think that's just the overall visual style for this incarnation of Turtles, so if that's a deal breaker, I get it, but on a whole, I think this looks fine for what it is. The audio front is perhaps a little less inspired, with some less than stellar music tracks accompanying the action alongside a ho-hum collection of stock sound effects. I presume the tracks are either straight from or aping the music of the 2012 series, but either way, it's not exactly what I would call totally tubular, dude. On the bright side though, they did bring in the cast of the 2012 series to record some new dialogue for this game, and to their credit, they didn't miss a beat picking up where they left off, even if some lines do have them sounding a touch older than before, which is understandable since I hate to break it to you folks, but people grow old and their voices change over time, i.e. Shredder's Revenge. But they sound as good here as they always have, so really it's more than fine. Overall, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Arcade Wrath of the Mutants for Nintendo Switch is a perfectly acceptable home conversion of a perfectly acceptable arcade brawler, with fairly basic and straightforward gameplay that's easy to pick up and play, a couple extra stages to round out the package. And hey, if that's all you want out of your brawlers, or you're a fan of this incarnation of the Turtles, then by all means go for it, it's a fun game while it lasts. But at the price they're charging, you'd be better off getting Shredder's Revenge if you haven't already, which costs about as much as this game does, but offers far more bang for your buck, and that's before the DLC add-on. Had Wrath of the Mutants made the home jump much earlier, we'd probably be telling a different story, but as it is, it's alright, but too little too late. Wait for a price drop and get it when it's dirt cheap, but otherwise, there's no rush.